Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LEC group stage Week 1 overview and analysis video. I'm very excited to get into this one. A lot of really good action, and of course, groups really matters. We're now out of the best of 1 stage. We are into the best of 3 stage, which means that we get to go over all of the important games. We're going to be seeing some teams by the end of this video qualified at the very least for top 3 in the summer split, which is incredibly important, and we're going to see some teams that are right on the edge, especially with this being the final regular season, the final split of the season. You know, some of these teams might be in a situation where if they're not, coming out of today looking good, then they're really going to have to struggle in that second week to even keep their season alive for a chance at that qualifier towards the back half of the year. So very important stuff, but I want to know what you guys thought of all of the games down below. There were a lot of stakes on the line and a lot of honestly surprising outcomes, I think, for a lot of different series, and I'd love to know what you guys were most interested in, what you were most surprised by, what worked for you. Let me know down below, of course, in a civil, constructive manner, and then without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. What we do on this channel is we go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team had. There are going to be 6 series to cover in this one. We're going to be doing the format a little bit different than just going over the series in order. I'm actually going to go group by group, so I'm going to start with all of the Group B games because they went first. I'll do all 3 of those series, and then I will cover the 3 Group A series. And so I know it's a little bit out of order from what happened, but I think it's a little bit easier to follow when you can talk about the 4 teams in each group and kind of the outcomes of those all at once. And so let's go ahead and kick it off. Of course, we're going to be kicking it off with Group B because they did go first. They played on day 1, and they were the first games on day 3. And so we're going to be kicking it off with a conversation about them. And the first series of day 1, the first series of group stage, was a matchup between the number 4 seeded Excel and the number 6 seeded Mad Lions that Excel was able to take in a 2-0 sweep. Really big win here for Excel. A lot of people have been doubting this team quite a bit, and, for good reason. They finished 10th in both of the previous 2 splits, both in winter and spring. They were the worst team in the LEC, so their emergence so far here in the summer split has been very, very welcome. I think this is a team and a collection of players that a lot of people really enjoy. Otoamne, Abadage, Patrick. A lot of players that I think people have grown to really appreciate in terms of the LEC sphere, and so to see them struggle as much as they have over the course of the beginning part of this season has certainly been frustrating, but it really does feel like they're peaking at the right time. We'll see if the hole is a little bit too big, but this is a big win over Mad Lions. This has been the most consistent team in terms of best ofs in the LEC. When you look at Mad, they finished 2nd in the winter split. They finished 1st in the spring split. And so, to be able to take them down relatively cleanly in this series, I think it's just a positive overall. Player of the series for me is going to go to Otoamne on the top side. I think there's a very real argument to be made that this is Peach in the jungle, and we'll get to him because he really was fantastic, and this was probably his best series in the LEC, even though I do think he has been a positive, but Otoamne is this team's best player, and I don't even think it's really all that up for debate at this point. He has been so important for what this team is doing. Rumble, in particular, is so strong on the current patch. A lot of people forget he was buffed, and so Rumble's actually in a really good spot right now. Maybe not to be blind picked, but certainly to be put in a position where you can pick him as a team fighter in the late game if you're going into something like Cassante, if you're going into something like Ornn that can't punish you nearly as hard in the early laning phase. And so Otoamne looking really, really good on 2 games of that. I was surprised to see it come back in game number 2 after it was so successful in that first game, but I think there were definitely some decisions made by Mad that I didn't necessarily agree with. But Otoamne looking really, really good, was just better than Chasey, and has honestly been a huge reason why Excel has continued to be competitive over the course of this split, and a big reason why I imagine they will continue to be competitive. But like I said, Peach also playing really well. This is probably his best series on Excel, and that's really exciting for Excel fans because you really didn't know what you were getting with Peach coming into the split. He's one of those players that I don't think a lot of people had on their radar, obviously an import, but had played in Europe a little bit in the ERLs before joining Excel, and so there was certainly an interesting conversation to be had about whether or not he was going to integrate himself immediately. Especially considering the fact that one of the big reasons he was brought in over Xerxes was it felt like there was a lot of communication issues. The mid game was really bad for this team. It felt like they didn't really want to play aggressive at any point in the game, and I think they brought Peach in to try and shore that up, to try and create a lot more action on the map. And so to bring somebody in who doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience in this region, maybe not a lot of experience with the language, and basically ask them to be a big communication fixer immediately, that's a very tall task. But I think game over game over game, Peach has gotten better and has gotten more used to playing with a lot of these players on Excel, and I think it's gotten to the point where he's one of the more consistent junglers in the LEC at the current moment, which is certainly not an easy task to have, because I do think that there are a lot of good junglers. But Odoamne, Peach, both really, really good in this series. They were the two standout members, but everybody played well. Patrick looked really good on Aphelios and on the Kai'Sa. It didn't really matter what he ended up playing. He was just better than Carzzy across this whole series, and Hylissang had basically no impact. We'll get to that in a second. Abbedagge was fine. I don't love the Twisted Fate pick. I think it's fine, especially if you've got something like the Rumble in the top lane. You've got Viego, you've got Aphelios, you've got plenty of damage on this team. I just think Twisted Fate is in a particularly bad spot right now. I don't think he's particularly useful, and, you know, it's great. Abbedagge, we know he can play Twisted Fate really well, but I don't think it's a champion that I want to see them go to consistently. But either way, I think the Rel was a big deal in this series. I think I'm really surprised to see Mad let that over twice in 2 games, and, you know, similar thing for the Rumble. I just think in general, Excel was able to create a lot of advantages. Now, their macro was not perfect. That's certainly an area that they still need to improve upon, but this team is so much better than they have been at any point in 2023 up until this point that getting a 2-0 win over Mad Lions is just really, really big for them. And then for Mad on the other side, this is not good. Like, you've now lost 7 games in a row, and that's really, really bad. This is starting to get into full panic mode. This team feels like it's lost a lot of the advantages that it had going into the split. A lot of the things that we were praising Mad Lions for. Remember, they started 4-0 in the summer split. To have them be 4-5 and now lose the first 2 games of group stage, it's definitely concerning. My dud of the series is going to go to Elyoya. He was completely irrelevant in this series. Nothing happened out of the jungle. That Nocturne game in particular, it felt like he wasn't even pressing the R key, which is really all you have to do on the Nocturne to be able to create a ton of advantages, but really not a lot happening for Mad Lions. The one positive takeaway from this is probably Nisqy in the mid lane, which is a really good sign to see. Nisqy is someone who has stepped up in the best ofs basically every other split up until this point, even though he has been good in the regular seasons, but he was not good towards the back half of the summer split. He was one of the worst players in the LEC in the back half of the summer split, and so to see him step it up and be the best player on Mad Lions in this series is certainly a positive, but you're going to need more than just him. Carzzy and Hilly were the positive of this team in the regular season, and they were pretty irrelevant in this series. Patrick and Limit were just significantly better both in and out of lane. They were certainly more proactive, and Hilly's, you know, engages and his plays certainly were not working out. Chasey got run over in the top lane by Odoamne, and like I said, Elyoya was completely invisible, which is very rare for him as a player. I consider him one of, if not the best jungler in the LEC in Europe at the current moment, and he did not perform like that in this series. So a lot of stepping up that needs to be done for Mad, because they're now in lower bracket. That's going to be the final series that we go over in week number 1 for them, you know, with the format and how it works. They're going to have to beat the loser of the series in the upcoming one, and then eventually the loser of the winners finals. And so, you know, Mad still has a chance to be able to make that top 4, and we've seen them make more improbable runs in the past, but it's certainly not looking all that good right now. But for Excel, they are 1 series away from guaranteeing themselves top 3 in the summer split, and that's astounding considering the situation that they were in just a couple of months ago. And so really good stuff from Excel. You're really happy to see this team start to peak at the right time, and honestly, they are kind of scary right now. And that's going to bring us to our second series of the first round in Group B here, and this was the number 1 seed in this group, and they got to select their own opponent, but it didn't exactly go as they anticipated. We had Fnatic taking on SK Gaming, and SK is able to pick up the 2-0 series win. Not a lot of people saw this one coming. I know SK was relatively interesting in the regular season, and they've had really good performances in the past, and Fnatic, you know, has only really gotten good as of recent, but Fnatic really was one of the best teams in the regular season, and it really wasn't all that close. They dominated the best of ones. They looked really good basically in every single series, and so for SK to come out and just kind of be better than them in 2 straight games, it's not expected, and it is very surprising, and it puts Fnatic in a pretty poor spot overall, because remember, as good as they did in the regular season, they've not been doing well in 2023. Championship points-wise, which is what they need to qualify for the season finale, they're really not in a great spot. So losing here and, you know, putting yourself in a position where you could theoretically get like 7th or 8th, that wouldn't put you in the season finale, which is a disaster for this team. But for SK, this is a huge win, and this really puts them in a very good spot at this point. Obviously, it doesn't secure them anything, but it definitely shows that, hey, you know, don't forget about us. We were really good in winter, and I know we've looked a little bit shaky since then, but we're still a really good team with a lot of really good players. And that is definitely the case. Player of the series goes to Irrelevant for me. This is not even up for discussion. He was so clearly the best player on the Rift across all of these games. unbelievable stuff, especially the Gwen in game number 2, which was just so utterly dominant. It's actually absurd. Irrelevant is a player that I've kind of fluctuated on in terms of my opinion of him. He's someone who at times have been like, wow, he's really good. He's underrated for how good he is. That's where I was at the beginning of the year after his tenure on Misfits, where I thought he was really good last year. But, you know, after especially Spring Split, I was just like, he's okay, right? There are a lot of really dominant top laners in the league, a lot of players that can win games for you consistently by getting a lot of resources. Irrelevant just hadn't been that guy for this team. But these are the kinds of performances that really make you think. Like, he is, you know, a really, really intriguing player and a top laner that I think is going to have a long-time career here in the LEC if he wants it, because he really is good enough to be able to play on almost any team in the entire league. And I think if he was on a team that had a little bit more of a high-profile situation going on, then I think a lot more people would be talking about him, me included, as one of the better top laners in the league, because this kind of performance was absolutely disgusting. He destroyed Oscar, but it wasn't just Oscar. Like, he just ran the map. His damage in this game number 2 was, like, off the charts, like, almost literally off the charts. It was bleeding in to Fnatic's side in terms of the damage charts, and so you just got to give him a lot of credit. He was really, really good. Marcoon, for that credit, was also really good, but Marcoon, unlike Irrelevant, is a player that I basically never wavered on. I've pretty consistently talked about Marcoon as one of my favorite junglers in the LEC, and I think that that has absolutely continued here. His consistency is incredibly admirable. I think, you know, he's played for a couple of teams that, again, haven't been the highest profile teams. Excel last year, or not just last year, but Excel over the course of the beginning part of his career, and now SK, and I don't think he's necessarily been talked about as one of the best junglers in the league, but he's been one of the best junglers in the league for 2 straight years now. And so Marcoon, I think, has basically solidified himself as one of the most interesting junglers to watch super consistently over the course of his LEC career. Very much excited for that. Exakick and DOS continue to be really good. It felt like they were much closer to their winter form in this series than anything that they have shown basically after that. It felt like we were really waiting for them to get back to that point where they were at in winter, where they were the best bot lane in the LEC, which is crazy to say, but, you know, I think that expectation was a little bit too much. I think allowing them to be, I don't want to say weak side, but they were kind of weak side in this series, allowing them to just kind of farm up and win in the 2v2 and just kind of self-isolate and be strong in team fights, I think is a really good avenue for SK Gaming. And Certus was good as well on some of his more, you know, classic picks, things like the Akali that you more associate with him as a player. And so really like what SK was able to do, and this is a massive win for them, especially in terms of confidence, but even just in terms of outcome. And then for Fnatic, this is a disastrous loss. Like, you couldn't have picked a worse thing to have happen at the start of group stage. This felt like a pretty automatic win for them in terms of current form. It felt like Fnatic was easily the best team in their group, and SK was maybe the worst team in group stage just in general going into the tournament, but that was absolutely not the case. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Humanoid, and really, you know, I've been saying it for a little while, but I think it's time we officially, like, come out and say it and have the conversation. Humanoid is one of the players that I think is holding Fnatic back from being one of the best teams in the league. And I like Humanoid. I think that his good performances are really good, but it really does feel like, especially in domestic play, like taking away Worlds 2022, over the past 2 years, Humanoid has really only been good when the rest of his team is winning. And he's not really been all that good when the rest of his team isn't winning. He's someone who does not push the envelope forward. He's someone who is not making Fnatic better, and I think that that is concerning to me. He was really bad in this series. His positioning was not good. His laning was not good. His damage was not good on the 2 games of Azir. It's concerning, and he has been the worst player on Fnatic in 2023, and that's a really bad thing to say. I'm not sure that Humanoid is the player that we all kind of wanted him to be when he came over to Fnatic. He's not, to me, a top 3 or top 4 mid laner in the LEC, and honestly, he might be significantly worse than that, especially when you factor in consistency. So really bad series from him, but it wasn't just him. Razork was really bad, got completely out-jungled by Marcoon, and they typically go in pairs. When Razork is playing well, Humanoid can play off of that relatively well, but when Razork is not playing well, Humanoid does not look like a competent mid laner, that kind of thing, right? And so, you know, those two kind of go together, and both of them had a bad series. Oscar was certainly the worst of the 2 top laners in this series, and Noah and Trimby really didn't have any sort of impact at all. Fnatic just didn't look very good. This very much felt like, you know, a bottom 2 team in terms of what they were doing against a team like SK, and that is very concerning because Fnatic had felt like they had so far exceeded that over the course of this split, even though that's kind of what they were over the previous ones. And so we'll see if that's something that ends up sticking for this team, and you're really hoping it's not, but they can't lose another series series or else they are out. They have to be able to make it to top 4 for them to be able to make the season finals, and that's a very daunting task now that you don't have any lifelines. And then for SK, this is a really nice win. We'll see, you know, in the next series if they're able to kind of bounce that off, but a really, really nice win for them to prove again that this is not a team that you can look over lightly. And then we have our finals, our winners finals, I should say, of Group B to take care of. It's the two teams that have already won in today's video. And in Group B, we had a matchup between Excel and SK Gaming. And Excel is going to be the one to take it in a 2-1 series win, and that pushes them into the top 4. It actually guarantees them top 3 because of the way that the bracket works in top 4, but man, what a turnaround for this organization. 10th, and at the very worst, 3rd in Summer Split. A huge improvement over what they've been able to do basically at any point so far in 2023, and you've just got to be excited for the players because a lot of these guys really have worked hard and really do deserve to see that success. Otawamne has been really, really good for this team. Peach coming in has been a huge upgrade and certainly, you know, has been exactly what they've needed in the jungle. Patrick, I think, has really been playing well. Limit has been better than I anticipated, but player of the series for me in this winners finals, this all-important winners finals series, is going to go to Abadaga in the mid lane. Really, really great stuff from him. I've kind of been lower on him. I think that he's been a little bit up and down for this Excel team over the course of this split, and really just 2023 is little time that he spent on the team in spring. I think was still like relatively inconsistent, and there were definitely moments here in summer where it was like, oh, well, he's really not, you know, that great of a mid laner at the LEC level, but he's been a lot better as of recent, and that LeBlanc game in game number 3 sealed their ticket into the top 4, into the playoff stage, whatever you want to classify it as. He played awesome, and he very much deserves the player of the series here. If he can keep it up, if he can continue to grow and be a little bit more consistent, more of that like 100 Thieves version of Abadaga rather than, you know, the Shulka version or what we saw earlier on Excel, I think that's going to be really, really big for this team, and I think in general that's going to really propel them forward. And it's not to say that anybody else on the team in this series played bad. There were certainly moments where I think all of them had questionable, you know, moments. Peach in particular in the jungle, I think, had some questionable moments, especially in that game 2 on the Sejuani. Wasn't exactly working out entirely for him, but I thought Patrick played really well in this series as well, and he's just incredibly stable. If you have a team that's winning, he's going to look very, very good. Even when the team is losing, he tends to be the one that looks the best out of all of them. He's just a player that I consider to be incredibly stable, a great team fighter, a really, really consistent force for the team. And Otawamne's been great. I already talked about him earlier in the video. He's probably Excel's best player, and he continues to be Excel's best player, even though he wasn't the most active in this series as a whole. He was still really good. Loved him on the Poppy in game number 3, but a really good game number 1 on the Gnar in that same vein. And so for Excel, this is a massive win. For you to be able to punch your ticket into top 3, into that playoff stage, it's about as good as you could have possibly hoped. Now, the job is not done. As much as I would love to say that, you know, getting top 3 in the summer split would guarantee you season finale, it does not for Excel, considering just how poorly they performed over the beginning part of the split. They need top 2 in order to guarantee their spot in the season finale. So a lot needs to go right for this Excel team, but this was definitely the first step and the necessary first step needed in order to get there. And then for SK on the other side, kind of a disappointing loss, but you actually played relatively well across this whole series. Certus in particular looked really good. Love him on these more aggressive picks. We saw it in the previous series, the Tristana, the Akali, coming out in both of the series that SK played, but the Syndra in game number 3 was still relatively good. I think Certus actually had a really good day. It was just unfortunate the rest of the team wasn't exactly on that same level. My dud of the series is going to go to Marcoon in the jungle. Not exactly a jungle showcase from either side here, but the Poppy was just significantly more effective in the hands of Otawamne than it was in Marcoon's. Even in game number 2, where I thought he was relatively okay, a lot of the success and positives that you can point to in that game were irrelevant, and they were Certus. They were the solo laners for SK. I think Marcoon took a really good performance against Fnatic, and just wasn't quite as clinical in this one, and that's going to happen every once in a while. It was against his former org. Maybe he's paying them off in some way, shape, or form. Obviously not, but you know, just kind of a frustrating performance. I think if Marcoon had been a little bit more clinical in terms of the late game and the team fighting, I think this could have been a little bit better for SK, but genuinely, like, they were competitive in this series. They were one game away from being able to punch their own ticket to top 3, which they have already done this year, so SK actually still in a relatively good spot. They're not out by any means. Nobody's out. It's double elimination here in the group stage, and so SK losing just means that they drop down to lower bracket. They will then play the winner of Fnatic and Mad Lions next week. And so really big performance coming in from them, obviously, earlier in the week to be able to take down Fnatic, but the job is absolutely not done. You gave yourself an opportunity to get there without really a ton of problems and without a ton of roadblocks in the way. Unfortunately, you weren't able to get the job done in the Excel series, so now it's up to you to be able to take down whoever ends up coming out of that second series as the contender, if you will. And then for Excel, your job in group stage is now done. You have advanced out of the group stage. You will be one of the top 2 teams, which means you are guaranteed upper bracket in the playoff stage, which is super important. Obviously, again, it means you keep your lifeline. Everybody gets one lifeline starting in groups, and Excel gets to keep theirs going into that best of 5 stage, and I think they're probably going to need it. There are a lot of really good teams in the LEC, and as good as Excel has shown they are recently, they're not exactly the most consistent team in the entire world, but at the very least, right now, this is a team you absolutely have to watch out for, and honestly, are they that far away from being a team that can reasonably compete for an LEC title? I don't really think so in their current state. And now that we've covered Group B, it's time to move on to Group A. They got their own day number 2 instead of day number 1, and they also had the second series of that final day of day number 3, and so a lot of good stuff to discuss, and we get to kick it off with a matchup between Team Heretics and Team BDS. That BDS is going to be able to come out on top, and this is a really big win for them. They needed to prove that last split wasn't a fluke, that some of the struggles that they've been undergoing in the summer are just a little bit of a bump in the road comparatively to what they were able to do in the spring split, where for a lot of it, they looked like the best team. And even going into finals, a lot of people picked them to be the winners of the finals. They were up 2-0, and they just couldn't figure it out. They couldn't finish Mad Lions off, but BDS looking for that redemption arc, and Heretics was first on that way. This was actually a relatively competitive series. Couple of mistakes from Heretics that really just kind of blow it out of proportion and really make BDS the major winners, I would say, of it all. But I also see a lot of takes on the internet at the current moment that I just don't agree with. And so going to be a little bit of discussion surrounding that at the moment. But let's talk about BDS first and foremost. Player of the series for me is going to go to Nuke in the mid lane. This is easily his best series of the summer split up until this point. I've actually been very critical of him as a player. Not only this split, not only on BDS, but basically his entire time in the LEC. I've been very critical of what he's been able to do, but this kind of performance, this is what you need out of your mid laner. You know, we'll get to VTO. VTO was also very good, you know, playing his standard marksman that he's basically been playing all split up until this point, but Nuke was fantastic. Certainly the one that kind of pushed BDS over the top, in my opinion. We'll get to Sheo in a second. I think Sheo was also phenomenal, and Adam, I think, did a lot of really good things for the team as well. But Nuke really was the one that was dealing a lot of the damage, especially on the Jace towards the back half of this series. This is the kind of performance I really needed to see from him to kind of show, like, hey, I could still be like a mid laner that competes at, you know, near the top of the LEC. Like, that was a concern for Nuke, I think, over the course of the regular season. And so, you know, I think this kind of performance kind of quells a lot of those doubts. And then, like I said, Sheo was also phenomenal. I really considered giving him player of the series because I do think that his contributions were basically just as big as Nuke's. He just wasn't getting nearly as much of the spotlight and nearly as much of the credit. But man, he was fantastic in this series, pulling out things like the Lilia, pulling out the Gragas, you know, allowing opportunities for Nuke to be able to pick up some of those really strong AD mid laners like the Tristana, like the Jace at the current moment, I think was really big, but piloting them at such a high level was incredibly impressive, especially that Gragas performance in game number 3, which was just really good. We've seen that champion kind of phased out of the jungle, if you will, and Sheo's like, no, I'm still really good at him. I'm still going to bring him out here, and it absolutely did work. Adam looked really good in games 2 and 3. He was miserably bad in game number 1, and that's just kind of what you get with Adam. You get the feast with the famine. He's been mostly feast over the course of this year. As you guys know, if you follow the channel, I'm a very big fan of what Adam's able to do on the Rift, or at least what he's been able to do for BDS. I think he's at worst like a top 2 or top 3 top laner in the LEC, and I think there's a chance that he could be better than that in certain circumstances. Crownie and Labrav were still really good. Labrav actually had a very sneakily great series, and Crownie, honestly, you know, good for BDS, was probably the most irrelevant player on the team, and that's good because you know Crownie's going to be able to step up. You know that he's a very good player. You know that he can kind of do all the things that you need him to do, and so to see him be able to, you know, kind of take a back seat, I would say, to the rest of this team and have them still be able to win games against a good Heretics team, I think is very impressive stuff. BDS just kind of showing that they're a little bit more complete. They're certainly a little bit more coordinated as a unit than what Heretics is, and they were able to come out on top because of it. And then for Heretics on the other side, kind of a rough series overall, I would say. Game 1 was actually really good from this team. I think VTO played really well, but everybody else was just a little bit more questionable to me. I thought Evie was pretty good in game number 1, but outside of that, not really a lot of like standout, fantastic individual performances. But games 2 and 3, a lot of the problems with this team were definitely highlighted. I don't know if it's a communication problem. I don't know if it's just, you know, an idea behind playing the game kind of problem, but this team doesn't really seem to have a great identity in terms of what it wants to do in the mid to late game. They kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit in terms of, okay, we're in a spot where we could do this or we could do this, and then they end up not really making a decision and just kind of losing the game because of it. That kind of felt like what Heretics was going through in a lot of the back half of this series, even on some more comfort picks. I mean, we saw Flacket on things like the Seraphim. He played a ton of that on G2 over the past year. Was really excited to kind of see him on some more actual AD carries, but we know he can play those mages in the bot lane. It also opens up VTO to play things like the Tristana in the mid lane, which we know he can be really good at, but there were just a lot of communication and mostly macro issues on this team. Dud of the series is going to go to Evie for me. Really not a good series from him individually at all, especially outside of game number 1. When you look at the Cassante and you look at the Ornn games, both of them were pretty horrendous, and it just kind of is what it is. Evie actually was someone I started to defend at the beginning of the year, going back to like winter split. I was like, you know, I was low on you in the preseason, but you've been playing relatively well for a Heretics team, and, you know, they're not winning, but you can see the flashes. You can see what could happen if this team gets better. And now that this team has gotten better, Evie has just not been able to keep up. It feels like he's gotten worse as the season has gone on, which is certainly a frustrating trait to have. I see a lot of people saying that Yankos and VTO are the only two players that are playing well. I think that is kind of misleading. If you ask me personally, I think VTO did play well. I think Yankos was just kind of whatever. He was certainly out-jungled in the back half of this series, and I see a lot of people blaming Mursa for a lot of the macro problems that this team has, but I think that is kind of foolish, if I'm being entirely honest with you. We know that one player doesn't make a lot of these decisions, especially with someone as vocal as Yankos is on the team. As much as I do agree that Mursa didn't have a very good day, he wasn't very good on the Nautilus, I think ignoring the fact that he has been pretty okay over the course of this split especially, I think that's a major mistake, and I think I see a lot of people saying that he's the worst player in the LEC. That's just recency bias. There's no truth behind that, and there is no logic behind making a comment like that, because if you watch the regular season, you would know that that's not true. The games where Mursa plays well, he plays really well. He was really good on roams. He was really good at being able to affect the rest of the map. He just had a bad day on Nautilus, and it's going to happen, and maybe the macro problems are his fault, and maybe he needs to take a step back when it comes to shot calling, or alternatively, maybe he just needs to be more decisive. Whatever it is, I don't know. Maybe it's up to Yankos or VTO or Flacket or Evie to make more decisions and to work more as a team. Whatever the issue is, I don't know. I'm not in comms. I'm not in the room. Even if we know that Mursa's the one talking, we can't just say for certain that that's the reason that their macro is bad. There's really no way for us as fans to be able to make that comment. And so for Heretics, hopefully they can figure out whatever their issues are, because individual talent-wise, this is not a team that should be going out in this round. But for BDS, this is a really, really big win, proving again that they are where they deserve to be, and they were probably the better team anyways moving into this series. They just weren't in very good form. So hopefully this generated some confidence again for them, because they've got a pretty big test coming up. And then moving into our other round 1 matchup here of Group A, and this one is a matchup that we've seen a ton of over the course of the last few years. Two organizations that I think have become very accustomed to facing off against each other in best of series. We had G2 Esports taking on Koi, and G2 was able to get the job done 2-0. This really isn't that big of an upset. G2 was clearly looked like the best team in the LEC in Summer Split, and I think a lot of people anticipated that going into it. They were the team that did the best at MSI for Europe, and I think in general, a lot of people just think that, until G2 is like genuinely dethroned, it's going to be very difficult for teams to be able to go up against them in any sort of reasonable fashion. And I, for one, am probably a part of that trend. I definitely think that G2, until proven otherwise, is the best team in Europe. And they continued to show that, at least in this series. They looked really, really good. Basically, everybody getting involved and playing really well, especially in that game 2, which really was just entirely dominant. Some weird drafts coming out from both teams, but we can go ahead and talk about it. My player of the series is going to go to Mickey X in the support position. He really just has been the best player in the LEC in Summer Split. I don't even really think it's all that up for debate. Players like Flacket have had really good weeks in the past, and, we've had a couple of other players that I think have been pretty consistent, but in terms of just, like, dominating games at a level that other players just aren't doing, I think Mickey X has been the best player, the MVP, if you will, of the Summer Split up until this point. He's been so ridiculously consistent on engagers. He's been so ridiculously oppressive on Braum. That's really been the thing that has stood out to me the most Ghost, it really is starting to feel like a signature pick for Mickey X. You can no longer allow it. In my opinion, he's simply too good on that champion, and he showed it off again in game number 2. He's just able to dominate basically everything that any team wants to do. He shuts it down so ridiculously efficiently, and yet people continue to kind of play into it, picking things like the Sivir. And Braum's just like, no, actually, I'm going to stop all of your damage instantly. Haha. Anyways, Mickey's really good. He's been playing really well, and I think G2's drafts definitely help him out quite a bit. And then the rest of the team was also really good. I think Caps is the other player you're going to look at having a really good series. Caps having a good series, what a major shock. He was pretty good over the back half of the split. Was definitely limit testing, I would say, in the regular season quite a bit, especially on the Nico. We saw a couple of circumstances and opportunities where he just wasn't playing up to the level that we knew Caps was playing at, but we all kind of had faith that he was going to be able to figure it out. Now, MSI certainly was a little bit concerning, but I think he's actually been better ever since he came back. It felt like that was a little bit of a wake-up call, a little bit of a reality check for him as a player, and I think he's been really dominant ever since he came back. Great game, too, on the Tristana there from him. Hans was really good. 2 games of Kalista. I'm not exactly sure why they value the Kalista so highly. We're going to continue to see that be a major pick for G2 throughout the rest of this week, and I imagine throughout the rest of the time in the LEC. Interesting to see if that's like a pick because they just want to dominate lane phase into a bunch of scaling ADCs, or if they're expecting things like the Kai'Sa and the Aphelios that are really strong in the current meta, and just saying, like, we know Kalista can consistently beat those. Whatever it is, like, it's interesting to see them have such prio on it. I know Hans is a very good Kalista player, but I don't think that the champion's all that good right now, and so interesting to see them pick it 2 games in a row. Yike pulls out the Rel jungle. I still think there are some major problems with Rel jungle. Same thing with Nautilus jungle. I think it's still very gimmicky in my mind, and I think you have to have the right team comp to be able to pull it off. But if you're the better team, you're going to look like it when you're on a pick like this, and I think that that's definitely the case. Broken Blade was fine on the Jax, a couple of wild plays in the top lane, but for the most part, it was relatively fine. G2's just one of those teams. They looked really good in this series, and that's kind of what we expected. And then for Koi on the other side, they're just not very good anymore. Like, I hate to say it, they might be the single worst team in group stage at the current moment. You know, we can talk about Mad being in horrible form. Koi is also just a team that I really do not believe in, basically at any level at this point. It feels like a lot of these members have regressed so much from where they were just like a couple of months ago that it's actually absurd. And most notably, the jungle and the AD carry. I think those are the 2 positions that really feel like they've lost a lot of the spark that they, you know, had last year when this team won the LEC. My dud of the series is going to go to Comp in the bot lane. I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times on this channel. I'm sure LEC fans are honestly kind of annoyed of hearing me say it at this point, but Koi wins. They live and die. They win or lose based off of Comp. It really is just how it has been in 2023. When Comp plays well, this team wins because Larsen's relatively consistent and Shigenda's a good team fighter, and so you've got enough firepower to be able to win games when Comp plays well. When Comp does not play well, they do not have a win condition. They can't win games when he plays bad, and that was again the case here going into G2. He just kind of got outclassed in lane. He was really bad in this series. It's the mechanics, it's the decisions, it's everything, it's the positioning. There really has not been a positive to Comp that has been consistently replicable over the course of this entire year. And if I'm a Koi fan, I'm upset by that, because Comp was the best AD carry in Europe last year, and to see him just kind of be a guy, maybe even a little bit worse than that, like a lower half AD carry in the LEC, it's frustrating, and I think Malrang's kind of in the same boat. I think a lot of the changes to the jungle is inability to kind of sacrifice his own resources in order to get his laners ahead, and, you know, that style being a little bit worsened. I was hesitant to say that that was going to hurt him a ton over the course of 2023, because good junglers can react to changes in the meta, they can react to changes in the game. Malrang has not been able to do that. He's been very inconsistent over the course of this year. He was pretty good in winter, especially when they got to the best of 5 stage, or the best of 3 stage, I should say, but ever since then, he's just kind of been, again, a lower half jungler in the league, and that's certainly got to be frustrating as a player that was in MVP conversations last year very consistently. The only positives to this team have really been the solo laners, Shigenda and Larsen. Larsen's just consistent. He's not going to be someone who drags you across the finish line, but he's also not going to be someone that loses you games. He's a good player, but I don't really think my opinion of him has changed at all. I feel like, if anything, everything that I was saying about Larsen at the beginning of the year that I was getting so heavily criticized for has all come true. Like, it has all been correct in terms of he's a good player. He's not an elite player. He's not someone that's on the level of Caps. He's not on the level of the best mid laners in the region, right? He's just good. He's consistent. And in the mid lane position, that can be very valuable when you have a lot of other players that can win you the game, because you know you're going to get good team fighting out of Larsen. But it's just not been more than that. And then Shigenda had a bad series, and that's not good for Koi. Shigenda's been relatively great over the course of this split. I think you could make an argument that he's actually been the best player on Koi in 2023. I would say it's either him or Larson, but, you know, him not being able to beat Broken Blade is not particularly surprising. And so I just don't know what this Koi team is supposed to do going into a team like G2. They're just not talented enough, and they're certainly not confident enough at their current state to be able to deal with them, and I think that very much showed in this series, and I don't really know what's going to happen. They now have to face Heretics in the, you know, losers round 2 or losers round 1, whatever you want to classify it, and I could very, very likely see a quick exit for this Koi team if they don't get their shit together. And then for G2, I mean, they're the best team in the league at the current moment. They look really, really good. Mickey X is an MVP. Caps is back in form. Yike looks really good on engaged champions when he's paying attention. Broken Blade, Hans are still really good. This team is just very complete, and they're very dangerous. Even though I'm a little bit lower on the output and the consistency of a lot of what the LEC teams have done in 2023, I think G2 is probably the major exception to that rule. And that's going to bring us to our final series of the video, and it's the 2 winners in Group A, determining who is going to come out as the #1 seed from this group. A battle between G2 Esports and Team BDS that G2 Esports is going to be able to take into games. That's a 4-0 week for G2, and that's a pretty good sign. This team looking really, really good, and BDS is not a pushover of a team. We've seen what they've been able to do when games matter, and I think that they still are relatively competitive in a team that's got to be watched out for as a potential top 4 team, but G2 simply is just better than everybody at the current moment, and you know what? It's everybody on the team. It's no individual one player. It's everybody performing at a high level. Player of the series for me in this one is going to go to Yike in the jungle. It's crazy how good Yike is. Like, I understand the perception that he's generated over the course of this year. I've already pushed back on it a lot over the course of this channel's history, but this perception of, oh, you need an entire team to play around him in order for him to look good. I get why there is an idea that that is the case, but basically every time that Yike has been given the opportunity to be more of a facilitator, to be more of a supportive jungler, he's done it at a very high level, as well as be, you know, a great carry on Kha'Zix or Lilia or whatever you want to pull out for Yike. He's just a really good League of Legends player, and he's arguably the best jungler in the LEC, and I think we've hit that point where it's pretty easy to, at the very least, be able to have him in that conversation. We've basically already done that over the course of this year, and I think this kind of performance, 2 games of Ivern, where he's just everywhere on the map, affecting every lane, completely dominating the game, this was a carry performance in both games on Ivern, and that's really what you want to see from Yike. This was phenomenal, and he really is a spectacular talent in the jungle that G2 is very lucky to be able to have. Wasn't the only player to play well. Caps played game 2 about as beautifully on Tristana as you can. His ability to weave in and out of damage and to be able to create for the rest of his team without really ever putting himself at any point in danger is just, it's so impressive, and there really aren't a lot of players in the world that are going to be able to play like that. Hopefully this means that Caps is getting back onto the page that he needs to get on to be like an international threat, because I think that's what people really want from Caps. They want him to easily be the best player in the LEC, and they want him to be able to keep up with basically any other mid laner in the entire world, like he was able to do in 2018, in 2019 especially, 2020, those years where Caps was legitimately, you know, arguably a top 5 player in the entire world. They want that version of him back. Game 2 kind of felt like that version of Caps. He really was playing at a ridiculously high level. Hansama was very good. They picked up the Kai'Sa this time, and then finally got to show off the tech. They got to play into Kai'Sa with the Kalista. I imagine that's what the Kalista, you know, pick was for. That's probably what they practiced it for, but interesting to see that they finally got a chance to show off the matchup, and it really did go heavily in favor of Hansama and Mickey X. We'll talk about it a bit when we get to the BDS section, but there was a pretty big bot gap in this series just as a whole, and a lot of that was Hansama stepping up and playing well. Mickey was still really good on the engagers. Broken Blade was solid on the top side in a very volatile top lane matchup against Adam. Just generally G2 looking dominant. It's a very similar story to what we just talked about in their series against Koi, where they just look like the better team. They're just better, and they continuously are able to show it off. And then for BDS on the other side, up and down, man. Ups and downs. There's really no other way to put it. There's some good and some bad. The good is that this team is going to be aggressive. They're going to try and make some plays. They're not going to roll over and die. Specifically Adam and Sheo, who I really do think tried their absolute best in this series. Adam had a couple of really miserable moments, but I still think he played really well for most of this series. And then Sheo was actively trying to make plays again on things like the Gragas in game number 2. He just had no prio, especially towards the bot side of the map to be able to do it. But the bot lane got run over. Like, this bot lane was not doing well. A combined 23 deaths across 2 games for this bot lane is very, very bad. It's very not good. You could give dud of the series to either of them. I'm going to give it to Crowny, though, because honestly, I'm going to say it, Summer Split's not been very good for Crowny. It certainly hasn't lived up to the expectations that he set in the Spring Split. We were at the point where it was like, oh, Crowny's the number 180 carry in the LEC. He's performing consistently like that in and out. He was awesome in Winter. He was awesome in Spring. And it just hasn't quite been that in Summer for me. He's been good. He's just not been great. And I think that that's very disappointing, to say the least. Hopefully he can figure some stuff out. Again, it's against G2 and it's against Hansama, who's the best AD carry in the LEC. At this point, I'm willing to say that. I don't even think it's really all that up for debate. Nobody else has been nearly as consistent as him throughout the year, and I think that Crowny, was really the one that was kind of contesting him for that job, and we just saw this series where Hans was significantly better, but Crowny is going to need to step it up. He's a big part of what this BDS team wants to do. Lebrov wasn't great either, but 2 games of engaged supports from a losing position in the bot lane, not necessarily going to look as good on the resume, and so a couple of negatives I would say overall for BDS. Nuke really didn't live up to the performance that he was showing earlier on in the week against Heretics. Just in general, BDS looked like a team that wasn't on the same level as G2, and we know that they're going to be able to, at the very least, be competitive against some of these middle tier, lower tier teams like Heretics earlier in the week, but that's not the goal for BDS. The goal for BDS is to get to Worlds, and to get to Worlds, you gotta be able to at least hang with a team like G2, and I just don't think they were really able to do that in this series. And then for G2, again, until proven otherwise, they're the best team in the LEC. They have now moved on into the playoff stage. They're going to be taking on Excel, the winners of Group B, in a best-of-5 in that winners bracket, and that's certainly going to be interesting. They've secured their spot at the very least in top 3. They didn't really need to do any of this because Summer doesn't really matter to them. They've already qualified for the season finale by winning the Winter Split, and so this is all just practice and all just to flex on their opponents, and I think flexing on everybody that they're playing against is certainly an apt description for what G2's been able to do so far this split. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LEC group stage week 1 overview and analysis of all 6 series up on the screen. Now you're going to see the updated bracket stage here for Group A and for Group B. The bottom stage is what we've got left. We know that both G2 and Excel are going to be moving on to the playoff stage to face each other. They've guaranteed top 3. But all the teams are still in it. We've got Koi versus Heretics in Group A, Fnatic versus Mad. The winners of those will then go on to face BDS and SK respectively. And the winners of those will then go on to the top 4, to the playoff stage, the best of 5 stage. So still a lot of really intriguing stuff coming. But let me know what you guys think of the LEC down in the comment section below. Who do you think is going to be the second team out of each group to end up making it out in week number 2? Would love to know your thoughts and opinions. Of course, let me know what you thought of the video down there as well. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people. And of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about all 4 of the major regions here, as well as the NACL, basically weekly. And with playoffs starting basically everywhere around the world at the moment, you certainly don't want to miss the playoff coverage on this channel. We go through everything that has to do with LoL Esports. So if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.